She married without love, driven by pain and duty. He bought her like one buys a rare piece of art, just to display and control. On their wedding night, he whispered coldly, "You're mine, and I'll do whatever I want." If you love stories of love and romance, watch until the end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you're listening to this beautiful story. Let's continue. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We'll keep going. Marriage was a contract, and like any contract, it carried unspoken clauses, hidden intentions, and promises made on the edge of an abyss. Lucy Martin, at 26, lived a silent grief. Her father had passed away a few months prior, leaving behind not only his physical absence, but also debts, bankruptcies, and a sick mother who lived between delusions and overly long silences. Lucy's youth had been marked by setbacks. She never traveled alone, never gave herself to anyone, never knew desire without guilt. She had remained a virgin not out of devotion or purity, but out of fear, of being seen, touched, undone. The cobblestone streets of Silverton seemed to narrow each day, as if the vibrantly colored colonial walls were closing in on her, reminding her of her voluntary prison. From her bedroom window in the family home on Kissing Lane, she could see tourists strolling carefree, taking photos in the famous lane where, according to legend, lovers kissed from balcony to balcony. A cruel irony for a woman who had never known true love. Every morning, Lucy followed the same routine. She prepared breakfast for her mother, Dorothy, administered her medications, and then reviewed the outstanding bills that accumulated on the kitchen table. Medical bills, overdue taxes, expired loans. The fortune her father, Mr. George Martin, once built with his shoe factory, had crumbled in the last years of his illness. "My dear," Dorothy's weak voice pulled her from her impossible calculations. "Did anyone come looking for me?" Always the same question. For weeks her mother had been asking about a visit that never arrived. Lucy believed it was part of her delusions, until one day the awaited visit appeared. It was on an April afternoon when the heat began to intensify in the streets of Silverton. The doorbell rang with unusual determination. Opening the door, Lucy found herself facing a man who seemed to have stepped out of another world. Tall, impeccably dressed, in a dark grey suit that contrasted with the city's bohemian atmosphere. His eyes, black as obsidian, studied her with a calculating coldness. "Miss Martin," his voice was deep, controlled. "I am Alexander Vance. I've come to see your mother." Alexander Vance. The name resonated in her mind like a distant echo. She had heard it before, in whispered conversations between her father and mother years ago. A mysterious businessman, heir to a fortune built with blood and silence. Alexander carried 41 years of secrets guarded under 7 locks. His childhood in elite orphanages and Swiss boarding schools had molded him to be insensitive, precise, and absolutely unyielding. In his trajectory, there was no room for weaknesses nor for love. "My mother is not in a condition to receive visitors." She tried to close the door, but his hand, firm as steel, stopped her. "Your mother has been expecting me for 3 weeks," he replied, with a certainty that disarmed her. "She wrote to me." Confused, Lucy let him in. The house, though modest compared to what he was surely accustomed to, maintained the elegance of the old days of prosperity. Hydraulic mosaic floors, walls with faded frescoes, carved wooden furniture that had belonged to her grandparents. Alexander advanced down the hallway as if he knew the way, to the room where Dorothy rested. Lucy watched them from the threshold. Her mother, emaciated by illness, seemed to come alive upon seeing him. Her eyes shone with a lucidity she hadn't shown in weeks. "Alexander, you finally came," Dorothy said, extending her trembling hand. He took it with a gentleness that contradicted his rigid posture. "Mrs. Dorothy, I received your letter." The conversation that followed was in low tones, and Lucy could only catch fragments. "The debt, the agreement, as we promised." After half an hour, Alexander left the room and headed directly for her. "Your mother has informed me of your financial situation," he said without preamble. "I am willing to assume all your family's debts." Lucy felt a wave of shame and wounded pride. "We don't need your charity, Mr. Vance." "It's not charity I offer, Miss Martin," he replied, his piercing gaze fixed on her. "It's an agreement." He invited her to sit in the living room, and there, with the precision of a surgeon, he detailed his proposal. He would assume all of the Martin family's debts, guarantee the best medical treatment for Dorothy, and ensure that Lucy would never have to worry about money again. In return, he asked for something that seemed absurd, impossible. A marriage. Immediate, discreet, and definitive. Why me? Lucy asked, stunned. There are hundreds of women who would be willing to marry you for your fortune. I'm not looking for just any woman, he replied coldly. I want you. There was no declaration of love, no romantic promises, only terms, conditions, expectations. You will live in my manor on the outskirts of Silverton. You will be presented in society as my wife. You will fulfill all the social obligations that correspond to that title. And you will share my bed. This last condition sent a shiver down Lucy's spine. She had never been with a man. Her inexperience was not only physical but emotional. How could she give herself to a stranger, however attractive he might be? I need time to think about it, she said, trying to maintain her composure. You have until tomorrow, he replied, standing up. Debts don't wait, Miss Martin, and neither does your mother's health. That night Lucy couldn't sleep. She debated between her duty to her family and the fear of a future with a man who seemed made of stone, steel eyes, controlled voice, restrained movements. But something else troubled her, a strange attraction to him, a curiosity that deeply embarrassed her. At dawn, she entered her mother's room. Dorothy was awake as if she too had spent the night sleepless. You already know, don't you? Lucy asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Dorothy nodded. Alexander Vance is a powerful man, my dear. He can give you the security I cannot. Why him, Mom? Why does he want to marry me? Her mother looked away. There are old stories between families that sometimes seek closure. What stories? What does he have to do with us? But Dorothy closed her eyes, feigning exhaustion. Do what you think is best, my daughter. But remember that sometimes today's sacrifices build tomorrow's miracles. When Alexander returned, punctual as a Swiss watch, Lucy had already made her decision. She would accept. For her mother, for her father's legacy, and for a part of her that was already tired of resisting life. The marriage was arranged with a speed that left her dazed. 3 days later, in an austere ceremony in a notary's office in downtown Silverton, Lucy Martin became Alexander Vance's wife. Her dress, though elegant, was not the princess dream she once imagined. Her bouquet, a simple arrangement of white lilies he himself had sent that morning, trembled in her hands as she signed the documents. Her mother could not attend, too weak to get out of bed. The only witnesses were Ernest Rose, the Martin family's lawyer for decades, and a silent man Alexander introduced as his administrator. Now you are mine, Alexander whispered in her ear as they left the office, his warm breath against her skin, sending an electric current down her spine. And I will do with you as I please. That night, a black car took them to the outskirts of Silverton, winding through mountain roads until they reached an imposing colonial manor, Vance Manor. Built during the 18th century by Alexander's Spanish ancestors, the property stood majestically amidst perfectly manicured gardens and ancient silver mines converted into wineries. The manor, with its pink quarry arches, inner courtyards with stone fountains, and terracotta floors seemed to belong to another era. But its beauty could not distract Lucy from the fear that grew within her as they ascended the main staircase to the bridal chamber. The moment she most dreaded had arrived. She, still in her wedding dress, standing at the bedroom door, hands trembling, he seated in a velvet armchair, watching her with a calmness that cut like a blade. You are mine, he repeated, standing up. And I will do as I please. But he did not touch her, not that night. He only watched her as she cried in silence, lying at the opposite end of the bed, wondering what kind of gilded cage she had chosen and if she could ever escape it. What Lucy could not imagine was that this marriage of convenience concealed secrets much darker than the obvious ones. Secrets that connected the Vances and the Martins in a past full of betrayals, forbidden loves and broken promises. Secrets that little by little would begin to come to light, forever changing both their destinies. In the days that followed, Lucy became acquainted with the cold corridors of Vance Manor, a structure of quarry stone and gold, where beauty hid control. Alexander stipulated her schedule, her clothes, her social engagements. His presence was dense, suffocating. but at the same time charged with a magnetism that confused her. She hated him, and she desired him, and that desire deeply embarrassed her. Her body, numbed for years, began to stir, but she would not surrender easily, not to the man who had bought her. Every morning, a maid named Josephine entered the bedroom exactly at 7, drew back the curtains, and left a carefully selected outfit for the day on the bed. "The master requests you be ready for breakfast at 8, she informed her in a subservient but distant tone. There was never any variation in schedule or protocol. Breakfast passed in a silence barely interrupted by the tinkling of silver against porcelain. Alexander read the newspaper or reviewed documents while Lucy tried to swallow bites that turned to stones in her throat. Sometimes she caught him watching her over the edge of the newspaper with an intensity that made her tremble. "Is there anything you need?" he asked one morning after noticing she had barely touched her food. "I would like to see my mother," Lucy replied, raising her gaze for the first time. "Salvatore will take you whenever you wish," Alexander said, referring to the chauffeur, "but I would prefer you notify me in advance. We have social engagements to attend." That same afternoon, Lucy visited Dorothy. She found her surprisingly improved. The dark circles had diminished, her skin had better color, and she was sitting in a rocking chair by the window. Beside her, a professional nurse organized medications in a pillbox. "My dear, what a joy to see you," Dorothy exclaimed, extending her arms. The house also looked different. New furniture, clean curtains, a jasmine scent that replaced the old smell of medicines. The change was so drastic that Lucy could barely recognize her own home. "Alexander has kept his word," Dorothy commented when they were alone. "He hired the nurse, brought in specialist doctors, even paid all the outstanding debts with the factory. The workers will receive their full severance." Lucy nodded, unable to articulate the mix of relief and bitterness she felt. Yes, she had sold her freedom, but at least her sacrifice served a purpose. "How does he treat you?" Dorothy asked, taking her hand. "Well," Lucy lied, "the manner is beautiful. I lack nothing, and as a husband, is he considerate towards you?" The question caught her by surprise. Lucy felt the heat rise to her cheeks. "No, we haven't. He hasn't touched me, Mom." Dorothy frowned, visibly confused. "In 2 weeks of marriage?" "He watches me, he studies me, he controls me, but he doesn't touch me." Lucy lowered her voice, though they were alone. "Sometimes I think he despises me, that he only wanted me as a trophy to display in society. Men like Alexander Vance do nothing without purpose, my dear. If he married you, he has his reasons, and I don't think it's contempt he feels." Before leaving, Lucy asked the question that had been tormenting her for days. "Mom, what is the connection between our family and the Vances? Why did Alexander choose me?" Dorothy looked out the window, where the sun was beginning to set behind Silverton's colorful hills. "There are debts that go beyond money, daughter. Debts of honor, of blood. What do you mean? You'll understand soon. But remember one thing. In this marriage, you are not the one indebted to him. He is the one paying a debt to us." Confused by her mother's enigmatic words, Lucy returned to Vance Manor. Upon entering, she found the manor unusually active, servants coming and going, carrying flowers, glassware, embroidered tablecloths. "What's happening?" she asked Josephine. "The master is hosting a dinner tonight, to officially present you as his wife to his closest associates." Panic seized Lucy. No one had informed her of any dinner. She was not prepared to face Silverton's elite, to pretend to be the happy wife of the powerful Alexander Vance. In her room, she found an emerald evening gown laid out on the bed. Beside it, a black velvet box contained a stunning emerald and diamond necklace. As she contemplated the jewels, she felt Alexander's presence behind her. "Do you like it?" he asked, so close she could feel the warmth of his body. "It's too much," Lucy replied without turning around. "I don't know if I can—" "You can and you will," he interrupted, taking the necklace. "Lift your hair." His fingers brushed Lucy's nape as he fastened the jewel around her neck. That simple contact sent an electric current through her entire body. When the necklace was secured, his hands descended her shoulders, slow, firm. "Tonight," he whispered in her ear, "you will be the perfect Mrs. Vance. You will smile, you will converse, and you will make every man at that table envy what I possess. Is that what I am to you?" "A possession." Alexander turned her to face him, his hands now on her waist. "You are my wife, And tonight everyone will know why I chose you." The dinner was a trial by fire. 12 businessmen with their respective wives, all observing her with barely disguised curiosity. Lucy felt like an exotic animal on display. However, to her surprise, she managed to maintain her composure, answering questions with a serenity she didn't know she possessed. "My wife holds a degree in literature from Silverton University," Alexander announced at one point, surprising her. She had never told him about her studies. Her thesis on Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz received an honorable mention. The guests nodded in approval. The conversation flowed towards cultural topics, allowing Lucy to shine in a field where she felt comfortable. Alexander watched her with something that could almost be interpreted as pride. When the last guest left, past midnight, Lucy found herself exhausted but strangely satisfied. She had survived her first test as Mrs. Vance. "You did well," Alexander said as they ascended the stairs to the bedroom. "You knew my academic background," she replied, stopping halfway up the stairs. "What else do you know about me that you haven't told me?" "Enough." His dark eyes glowed with a contained fire. "I know you like to read Gabriel Garcia Marquez before bed, that you prefer bitter coffee, that in college you rejected all your suitors, even the governor's son." The revelation left her breathless. "You investigated me?" "I investigate everyone with whom I do business." "This isn't business, Alexander. It's a marriage. Is there a difference?" His smile was cold, but his eyes still burned. That night, for the first time since the wedding, Alexander did not sleep in the adjoining room, but next to her. Lucy remained rigid under the sheets, waiting for him to assert his marital rights. But again he did not touch her. He just lay beside her, breathing rhythmically, as if mere proximity was enough. The next morning, Lucy woke up alone. On Alexander's pillow she found a note. "I will be away for 3 days. Business in capital city. Salvatore is at your disposal if you wish to go out." The days without him were strangely empty. Lucy took the opportunity to explore the manor, discovering corners she hadn't known. The library with volumes dating back to the 18th century, the back gardens with a greenhouse full of rare orchids. The old stables now converted into a garage for Alexander's collection of classic cars. On his 3rd day of absence, curiosity led her to Alexander's private study. The door was locked, but Lucy had observed Josephine storing a set of master keys in a kitchen drawer. With her heart pounding, she opened the door and entered. The study was austere but elegant. Walls lined with dark wood, a massive mahogany desk, bookshelves with accounting and law books. Lucy checked the drawers, finding only business documents she didn't understand. As she was about to give up, her gaze fell on a small framed picture hung by the window. It was an old sepia photograph. It showed a young man standing next to a seated woman. The woman was holding a baby. Despite the image quality, Lucy immediately recognized the woman. It was her mother, Dorothy, at least 20 years younger. And the man beside her bore an astonishing resemblance to Alexander. With trembling hands, she took down the picture and examined it more closely. Turning it over, she found an inscription: Edward Vance, Dorothy Martin, and little a, 1980. Edward Vance, Alexander's father. Next to her mother. Holding him as a baby. What did this mean? Did her mother know Alexander's father? Why had she never mentioned it? And more importantly, why did Alexander keep this photograph like a hidden treasure? The sound of a car approaching the entrance startled her. Quickly, she rehung the picture and left the study, locking the door. She barely had time to reach her room when she heard Alexander's voice in the hall. That night, during dinner, Lucy watched him with new eyes. Every gesture, every word now seemed laden with hidden meaning. "You seem distracted," he commented, pouring her wine. "Did you miss me?" "Why did you marry me, Alexander?" she asked directly, ignoring his question. "The real reason." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I told you I had my reasons. Does it have anything to do with my mother and your father?" The change in his expression was subtle but undeniable. A tension in his jaw, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "What do you know about my father?" "Only what I saw in a photograph. He and my mother together. With you as a baby." Alexander set his glass on the table with studied slowness. "You entered my study." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Lucy held his gaze defiant. "I have a right to know what you got me into." What history there is between our families. Not tonight, he stood abruptly. I'm not in the mood for family revelations. But Lucy wasn't going to let him off so easily. She stood up too, confronting him. You owe me the truth. You bought me, you brought me here, you display me like a trophy. The least I deserve is to know why. In 3 strides he reached her, gripping her arms with contained force. His face was so close she could feel his warm breath. You want the truth? The truth is that our families have a blood debt. And you, Lucy Martin, are the payment. What debt? What are you talking about? But Alexander did not answer. Instead, he did something that took her completely by surprise. He kissed her. It wasn't a tender or sweet kiss, but one charged with fury, frustration, with desire contained for too long. Lucy should have rejected him, should have fought, but to her own surprise, she found herself responding with equal intensity, her hands clinging to his shirt, her body betraying all her rational resistance. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Alexander's gaze had changed. The ice had melted, revealing a fire that consumed her. Tonight, he said, his voice hoarse, you will be completely mine. He carried her in his arms to the bedroom, his lips never leaving hers. Lucy felt like she was drowning in unknown sensations, in a desire that shamed and liberated her at the same time. But just as he laid her on the bed, the phone rang. Alexander ignored it at first, focused on slowly unbuttoning Lucy's blouse. The phone kept ringing insistently. You should answer, she whispered, part of her relieved by the interruption, part disappointed. Alexander grumbled a curse and picked up the receiver. His expression changed instantly, passion replaced by concern. When? How serious? He listened for a moment. I'm on my way immediately. He hung up and looked at Lucy, who was already sitting up, guessing that something serious had happened. It's your mother, Alexander said, his voice now gentle. She's had a relapse. They're taking her to the hospital right now. The corridors of Silverton Central Hospital seemed endless as Lucy ran towards the intensive care unit. Beside her, Alexander advanced with long, precise strides, his face an impenetrable mask. The call had torn them from a moment of passion, throwing them into the cold reality of Dorothy's illness. Mrs. Martin is stable for now, the doctor informed them when they finally could speak with him. She suffered a heart attack, but she arrived in time. The next 24 hours will be crucial. Lucy collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, the weight of the last hours falling upon her like a slab. Alexander remained standing, speaking in a low voice with the doctor, asking technical questions, mentioning specialists and treatments that Lucy barely understood. I've called a cardiologist from Capital City, he told her later, sitting beside her. He'll arrive first thing tomorrow. Thank you, Lucy murmured, surprised by his efficiency. I didn't think you'd care so much. Alexander looked at her with an inscrutable expression. Your mother is important to me, more than you imagine. That night they stayed at the hospital. Alexander insisted on getting a private room for Dorothy, with the best nurses and all possible care. Lucy refused to leave her mother's side, so he had food brought in, clean clothes, even a blanket so she could lie down on the room's sofa. Past midnight, when Dorothy finally slept under the effect of sedatives, Lucy watched Alexander, who contemplated the sick woman with a strange mixture of concern and guilt. Why do you care so much about my mother? She asked in a whisper. Alexander tensed. It's not the time for that conversation. It's exactly the time, she insisted. I was about to give myself to you without knowing who you really are, without understanding what game you're playing with my family. He looked at her for a long time, as if evaluating something within himself. Finally, he sighed. My father, Edward Vance, and your mother had a relationship many years ago before you were born. The revelation didn't surprise Lucy as much as it should have. The photograph had already given her a clue. Were they lovers? More than that. They were engaged. Edward broke off the engagement to marry my mother, a woman of better social standing chosen by my grandfather. He left Dorothy pregnant and alone. Lucy felt the ground open beneath her feet. My mother was pregnant with your father's child? Alexander nodded, his gaze now fixed on Dorothy. A baby born the same year as me. A baby who disappeared. Disappeared? What do you mean? No one knows what happened to that child. My father claimed Dorothy gave him up for adoption. She always swore the baby was stolen from the hospital on my grandfather's orders. A chill ran through Lucy. And what do you believe? I believe my grandfather was capable of anything to protect the Vance name. Even of stealing a baby, he considered a threat to his lineage. The implication of his words was too terrifying to process immediately. Lucy looked at her sleeping mother, imagining her young in love, betrayed, and then devastated by the loss of her child. Dorothy's child would be my half-brother, Alexander said, his voice barely audible. A brother I never knew, but whose existence has haunted my family for decades. And that's why you married me, to somehow compensate for what your family did to mine. Alexander didn't answer immediately. When he did, his words were carefully measured. I married you for several reasons, Lucy, that's just one of them. Before she could press for more answers, the room door opened. Ernest Rose, the Martin family's lawyer, entered with a worried expression. He was a man in his 60s with grey hair and piercing eyes that had seen too many tragedies. I came as soon as I heard, he said, approaching Dorothy's bed. Then, seeing Alexander, his expression hardened. Vance, I should have imagined you'd be here. The tension between the two men was palpable. Rose, Alexander replied dryly. Always late. The lawyer ignored the comment and addressed Lucy. How is she? Stable for now. The doctor says the next few hours are critical. Ernest nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. You should rest, Lucy. I'll stay with Dorothy. It's not necessary, Alexander intervened. My wife and I will stay. Your wife, Ernest repeated with disdain. A marriage arranged under duress. A blatant purchase. Watch your words, lawyer. Don't forget who you're talking to. Lucy stepped between them. Please, it's not the time or place. My mother needs peace. Ernest backed away, but his gaze remained fixed on Alexander. I just want to ensure Dorothy receives proper care, and that Lucy is safe. Safe? Alexander smiled humorlessly. From me? How ironic, coming from you. What do you mean? Lucy asked, confused by the exchange. Ask your dear family lawyer how honest he's been with you all these years. Ernest visibly paled. Don't do this, Vance. Do what? Tell the truth. Isn't that what you preach? Alexander approached Lucy, placing a hand on her shoulder. Your mother trusted this man too much. Don't make the same mistake. With those enigmatic words, Alexander left the room, leaving Lucy more confused than ever. What was he talking about? She asked Ernest once they were alone. The lawyer sighed deeply, running a hand through his grey hair. Alexander Vance is a manipulator. He only seeks to sow discord to distance those who could protect you from him. That doesn't answer my question. Ernest sat heavily in the chair beside Dorothy's bed. Your mother and I, we've been friends since college. I've always looked out for her well-being and yours. Just friends? Lucy remembered the glances, the gestures, the devotion with which Ernest had always treated her mother. There was a time, many years ago, when I was more than a friend to Dorothy. But then Edward Vance appeared, with his fortune and his illustrious name, and I lost her. And now his son has bought me, Lucy murmured, feeling the puzzle pieces beginning to fit. History repeats itself. It doesn't have to be this way. I can help you annul this marriage. It was performed under duress. I can argue that you were not in full possession of your faculties due to economic and emotional pressure. Lucy considered the offer. Part of her longed to be free from the contract that bound her to Alexander. But another part, one she was just beginning to recognize, resisted. Did you know about the baby? She finally asked. My mother and Edward Vance's son. Ernest visibly tensed. He told you that, is it true? Did my mother have a child before me? A child who disappeared? The lawyer took Lucy's hands in his. It's a painful story, Lucy. One your mother has tried to bury for years. Yes, it's true. Dorothy became pregnant with Edward Vance's child. When he abandoned her for another woman, she decided to go ahead with the pregnancy alone. And what happened to the baby? A boy was born. Beautiful, your mother told me. But 3 days later, he disappeared from the hospital. The official version was that Dorothy, in a moment of desperation, had given him up for adoption. But she always swore he had been stolen. And you did nothing. You didn't help her look for him? Ernest released her hands, hurt by the accusation. I did everything I could. I hired investigators, filed lawsuits, even confronted old Vance, but his influence was too great. All doors closed. All witnesses retracted their statements. It was like fighting a ghost. And my father? Did George Martin know about this when he married my mother? Your father was a good man who loved Dorothy unconditionally. He met her a year after the baby disappeared, when she was still heartbroken. He helped her rebuild her life, and years later you arrived her greatest joy. Lucy tried to absorb all this new information, this hidden past that explained so many things, the perpetual sadness in her mother's eyes, her father's overprotectiveness, and now, Alexander's interest in her family. Do you think Alexander knows where that child is? Do you think he knows him? Ernest shook his head. Alexander was barely a year old when all this happened. I doubt he knows more than what he's been told. Then why did he marry me? Family remorse? The Vances don't know remorse, Lucy. If Alexander married you, he has a selfish motive. Perhaps his grandfather's will. Perhaps something darker. But I assure you one thing. It's not out of love or redemption. The lawyer's words pierced Lucy's heart. Just as she was beginning to see a human side to Alexander, Ernest reminded her who he truly was, a Vance, a calculating man who had bought a wife to settle a family debt. At that moment, Dorothy stirred in bed, her eyes slowly opening. Lucy immediately approached. "Mom, I'm here. Everything's fine." Dorothy looked at her with eyes hazy from medication. "Lucy, fine child. Don't strain yourself, Mom, you need to rest." But Dorothy weakly held her arm. "Listen to me. There's something you need to know." "About Alexander?" "I know, Mom. I know about Edward, about the baby." "No, you don't understand." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The marriage, it wasn't his idea." "What do you mean?" "It was me." The confession came with difficulty. "I asked him to marry you." The revelation left Lucy breathless. "You? Why?" "To close the circle." Dorothy's eyes began to close again, overcome by exhaustion and medication. "So that finally, the families find peace." Lucy looked at Ernest, seeking an explanation, but the lawyer seemed as surprised as she was. Before she could ask more questions, the door opened again. Alexander entered, followed by a serious-looking doctor. "Lucy," Alexander said, his voice unusually gentle, "Dr. Miller wants to speak with us about your mother's condition." As they went out into the hallway to talk with the specialist, Lucy felt like she was caught in a web of family secrets, lies, and half-truths. Each revelation only brought more questions, and at the center of it all was Alexander Vance, the man who was now her husband, but who remained a complete enigma to her. Was he her jailer or her savior? A avenger or a redeemer? And more importantly, what would happen when the full truth, the one everyone seemed to be hiding from her, finally came to light? Dorothy's recovery was slow but steady. In the following weeks, Lucy divided her time between Vance Manor and the hospital, creating a routine that allowed her to fulfill her obligations as Alexander's wife and her devotion as a daughter. To her surprise, Alexander facilitated this arrangement, providing her with a car and chauffeur and adjusting his social engagements so she could spend afternoons with her mother. Dorothy's revelation that she herself had orchestrated the marriage weighed on Lucy's mind. Why would her mother have planned to unite her with the family that had caused her so much harm? "To close the circle," she had said. But what circle? And at what price? One afternoon, returning from the hospital, Lucy found Alexander waiting for her in the Vance Manor foyer. He was dressed casually, which was unusual for him, dark jeans and a white linen shirt that softened his usual severe appearance. "I have a proposal," he said without preamble. "I need to be away from Silverton for a few days. Business matters that require my personal attention. I thought you might accompany me." Lucy looked at him in surprise. He had never included her in his business trips. "Where to?" "St. Michael's Landing. The Vance family has owned a property there since colonial times, a small estate among vineyards and ruins. I need to review some old documents from the family archive." The idea of leaving Silverton, of getting away from the hospital and Vance Manor, where every corner seemed to hold secrets, was tempting. Besides, St. Michael's Landing was a city she had always wanted to visit, with its cobblestone streets, colonial architecture, and artistic atmosphere. And my mother? I can't leave her alone. Mrs. Dorothy is out of danger, according to the doctors. Moreover, I've hired nurses to care for her day and night. Alexander paused, studying her reaction. "It would only be 3 days. A change of scenery would do you good." There was something in his tone, an unusual vulnerability, that intrigued her. Was Alexander Vance, the man of ice, asking her, almost pleading with her to accompany him? "Why do you want me to go with you?" "The truth." Alexander held her gaze. "Because there are things you need to know, things that are better shown than told. And because," he hesitated as if the words cost him physical effort, "because I no longer want to be alone in that house full of ghosts." The sincerity of his response disarmed her. She nodded slowly. "I'll go. But first I want to stop by the hospital to explain to my mother." The trip to St. Michael's Landing, a little over 2 hours' drive from Silverton, passed in surprisingly comfortable silence. Lucy contemplated the changing landscape, the arid mountains, the solitary cacti, the occasional towns that appeared like mirages in the distance. Alexander skillfully drove his Range Rover, occasionally pointing out a landmark or sharing a historical anecdote about the region. "My grandfather used to say this land was cursed," he commented as they crossed a particularly desolate valley. "That the conquerors paid with blood for every ounce of gold and silver they extracted." "And do you believe it? Do you believe in family curses?" Alexander considered the question. "I believe actions have consequences, and that those consequences sometimes haunt families for generations. Like what your family did to mine. Like what we all did to each other," he corrected. They arrived in St. Michael's Landing as the sun began to set, bathing the city in a golden glow that made the tiled roofs and church domes shine. Unlike Silverton, nestled among mountains, St. Michael's Landing spread out more horizontally, with wider streets and architecture that blended colonial with neoclassical and Mexican Baroque influences. The Vance property, known locally as the Vance Estate, was located on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by vineyards and overlooking the mountains. It was an 18th century construction, smaller than Vance Manor but equally impressive, with its ochre quarry facade and wrought iron balconies. "I haven't been here in years," Alexander commented as they entered the central courtyard, where a Talavera tile fountain murmured softly. "My grandfather used to spend summers here. He said the air of St. Michael's Landing cured all ills. And did it cure them? Not his. He died bitter and alone, hated by everyone who knew him." An elderly butler, Mr. Sterling, received them with an old-fashioned bow and led them through salons decorated with antique furniture, faded tapestries, and portraits of severe-looking ancestors. The place seemed frozen in time, preserving the splendor of a bygone era. "I have prepared the master suite for the lady and gentleman," Mr. Sterling announced, opening the doors to a spacious room with a four-poster bed and balconies overlooking the vineyards. Lucy looked at Alexander, uncomfortable with the idea of sharing a room. Until now, at Vance Manor, they had maintained the fiction of sleeping together. But in reality, Alexander occupied an adjoining room. "Also prepare the blue room," Alexander ordered, perceiving her discomfort. "My wife prefers to have her own space." Mr. Sterling nodded without showing surprise, as if accustomed to the Vance family's unconventional marital arrangements. That evening, they dined on a terrace overlooking the lantern-lit vineyards. The meal prepared by Mr. Sterling's wife was delicious: chiles en nogada, tortilla soup, and a red wine produced in the property's vineyards. "A toast," Alexander proposed, raising his glass. "To family secrets finally coming to light." Lucy clinked her glass against his. "To the truth, however painful it may be." They drank in silence, the tension between them palpable, but not unpleasant. There was something about this place, far from Silverton and the watchful eyes of society, that seemed to liberate something in Alexander. His posture was less rigid, his gaze less cold. "Tomorrow I'll show you the archives," he finally said. "Letters, photographs, legal documents, the complete history of our families. Why now? Why did you decide to bring me here after keeping so many secrets?" Alexander looked at her intently. "Because what I discovered in these archives changes everything, and because you deserve to know it before deciding if you want to remain my wife." The implication that he might free her from the marriage contract surprised her. "You would let me go? After everything you've done to have me? I didn't bring you here to imprison you, Lucy. I brought you to protect you." "Protect me? From what?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had taken on a somber tone. "From people who would do anything to keep the secrets of the past buried." That night, in the solitude of the Blue Room, Lucy couldn't sleep. Alexander's words resonated in her mind, along with those of her mother and Ernest. Everyone seemed to know parts of a story in which she was a protagonist without knowing it. Around midnight, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, she decided to explore the Vance estate. The old floorboards creaked under her feet as she walked through corridors dimly lit by moonlight filtering through tall windows. Without a clear destination, her steps led her to a library in the west wing. The door was ajar, and a sliver of light escaped through the crack. Alexander was there, sitting at an antique desk, examining yellow documents in the light of a lamp. She hesitated at the door, not wanting to interrupt. But something in Alexander's posture, in the intensity with which he studied those papers, irresistibly drew her in. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Alexander looked up, surprised but not annoyed. "I couldn't sleep," he explained. "Me neither." Lucy approached the desk. "What are you reading?" "Letters. From your mother to my father, and from my father to her." Alexander handed her one, written in elegant, feminine calligraphy that she recognized as Dorothy's. The letter, dated 1980, was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "My beloved Edward, the child was born today, March 15th. He is beautiful. With your eyes and my smile, the nurse says. I have named him Michael, as we agreed. I know you cannot acknowledge him publicly, that your marriage to the woman chosen by your father is inevitable, but I beg you not to abandon us completely. This child deserves to know his father, even in secret. I love you despite everything. Dorothy." Lucy felt a knot in her throat. What happened next? Alexander passed her another letter, this time written in masculine, trembling handwriting. "Dearest Dorothy, I cannot find words to express my horror and my pain. I have moved heaven and earth to find our son, but he seems to have vanished. All hospital records have been altered. The nurse who attended him has disappeared. My father denies all involvement, but I see the truth in his eyes. I swear I will not rest until I find Michael and return him to you, even if it is the last thing I do. Yours always, Edward." "My father could never keep his promise," Alexander said as Lucy finished reading. "He died in a car accident 6 months later, or at least that was the official story." "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that my grandfather, Augustus Vance, was capable of anything to protect the family lineage, even eliminating his own son if he became a threat. The idea was too monstrous to assimilate." "You think your grandfather?" "I have no concrete proof, only suspicions, and this." Alexander showed her another document, a will dated shortly before old Augustus Vance's death. "My grandfather modified his will days before he died. He included a clause that no one understood at the time. If I didn't live at least 2 years with my legitimate wife, the Vance estate and a significant part of the family fortune would pass to the other son." "The other son?" Was he referring to Michael? "I believe so. My grandfather knew something. Perhaps where Michael was, or who had adopted him. His will was his way of ensuring that even after his death, the Vance family followed his rules." "And that's why you married me," Lucy said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "To comply with the will's clause." "In part, but there's more." Alexander spread a series of photographs on the table. "These were taken by a private detective I hired years ago. When I began to suspect the true story, the photographs showed a man in his 40s, with an astonishing resemblance to Alexander, the same strong jaw, the same piercing eyes. In several images he appeared conversing with Ernest Rose, the Martin family lawyer. Who is he? His name is Michael Rose. Officially, he's Ernest's nephew. In reality, I believe he's the child Ernest adopted after he disappeared from the hospital." The revelation dropped like a bomb. "Ernest? Are you saying it was Ernest who stole my mother's baby?" "I'm saying that Ernest has been lying all these years, that he has kept Michael close to him, probably waiting for the right moment to reveal his identity and claim the Vance inheritance, and that he would do anything to prevent you and me from discovering the truth." Lucy felt the room spin. Why would Ernest do something like that? For love of your mother? For hatred of my father? For greed? Motives are not lacking. Alexander took her hands in his. "That's why I brought you here, Lucy, because I suspect Ernest is behind your mother's sudden health deterioration, and because I fear you could be next." "That's absurd. Ernest has been like a father to me, And that's exactly why he's so dangerous. No one would suspect him. Alexander squeezed her hands urgently. I need you to trust me. Only then can we protect you and your mother, and finally discover the whole truth. Lucy withdrew her hands, overwhelmed by the implications of what she had just heard. Could she trust Alexander? Or was he manipulating her, using half-truths to turn her against the only man who had always been there for her family? I need time to process all this, she finally said, standing up. Good night, Alexander. As she returned to her room, Lucy felt like she was walking through a minefield, where every step could unleash an explosion of unpredictable consequences. Who was telling the truth? Who was lying? And more importantly, to whom did she owe her loyalty? The next morning dawned cloudy, with a thick fog enveloping the vineyards and blurring the outlines of the distant mountains. Lucy woke early after a night of restless sleep plagued by nightmares in which familiar faces transformed into menacing masks. After dressing in jeans and a light sweater, St. Michael's, Landing's climate was cooler than Silverton's. She went down to the dining room, expecting to find Alexander. Instead, she only found Mr. Sterling, who informed her that the master had left early to attend to matters in the village, but would return for lunch. He said to make yourself at home, madam, the butler added, to explore the Vance estate at your leisure. Alexander's absence provided her with the perfect opportunity to investigate on her own. After breakfast, she returned to the library where they had been the night before. The documents were no longer on the desk, but Lucy was determined to find them. After almost an hour of searching drawers and bookshelves, she discovered a small safe hidden behind a portrait of old Augustus Vance. It was locked, of course, but next to it, as if someone had intentionally left it, was a folder with the letterhead Montiel Private Investigations. The folder contained detailed reports on Michael Rose, his education in private schools in Capital City, his career as a successful architect, his seemingly normal life, and something else. A series of recent photographs showing Michael entering and leaving the hospital where Dorothy was hospitalized, dressed in a medical gown. Impossible, Lucy murmured, feeling a chill. Michael Rose was not a doctor, but an architect. What was he doing disguised in the hospital where her mother was convalescing? She continued to review the documents and found something even more disturbing, a falsified medical report with Ernest Rose's signature, authorizing an experimental treatment for Dorothy. A treatment that, according to the investigators' attached notes, could have caused the heart attack that almost ended her life. Her head spun. Was it possible that Ernest, the man who had been like a second father to her, was conspiring to harm her mother? Was it possible that Michael, Dorothy's supposed lost son, was collaborating in this macabre plan? The sound of a car approaching startled her. Quickly, she put the documents back where she had found them and left the library. Alexander entered the foyer carrying several bags. "I've brought you something," he said by way of greeting, handing her a package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a beautiful embroidered silk shawl, typical of local craftsmanship. "For tonight. There's a festival in the village I thought we might attend." The normalcy of the gesture, the everydayness of planning an outing together, contrasted brutally with the morning's discoveries. Lucy held the shawl in her hands, undecided. "Did you find anything interesting while I was out?" Alexander asked, his tone casual but his gaze intense. "Did you leave those documents for me to find?" He didn't deny the accusation. "I needed you to see the evidence for yourself, to draw your own conclusions. They could be fakes. You could be manipulating me. They could be. I could be." Alexander stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "But you know that's not the case. You feel it here." He lightly touched her forehead. "And here." His hand moved to rest on her heart. The contact, though slight, sent an electric current through her entire body. Lucy recoiled, confused by her own reaction. "I need to call my mother," she said, seeking an escape from this sudden intimacy. "To check if she's okay." Alexander nodded, understanding. "Use the phone in my study. It has a direct line, it's safer." The call was brief but reassuring. Dorothy sounded stronger, more lucid. She mentioned that Ernest had come to visit her, bringing her flowers and magazines. "He's always so thoughtful," she commented affectionately. "Like a guardian angel." Her mother's words now took on a sinister nuance in light of her discoveries. A guardian angel? Or a predator disguised as a protector? All good? Alexander asked when she returned to the foyer. My mother is better. Ernest visited her today. Something dark crossed Alexander's gaze. We should return to Silverton tomorrow. Earlier than planned. But you said we'd be here for 3 days. Circumstances have changed. I don't like Ernest having so much access to your mother while we're away. The concern in his voice seemed genuine, which only increased Lucy's confusion. If it was all an elaborate manipulation by Alexander, why did he show such sincere worry? We'll go to the festival tonight, as planned, she decided. And tomorrow we'll go back. I need to confront Ernest, ask him directly about Michael. It's dangerous. We don't know what he's capable of. It's more dangerous to stay in the dark. Besides, she added with a determination that surprised herself, I'm not alone in this. I have... You. Alexander's expression softened, a sudden vulnerability showing in his usually impenetrable eyes. Yes, you have me, for whatever you need. That night the town of St. Michael's Landing glowed with lights and colors. It was the feast of St. Michael the Archangel, patron saint of the city, and the streets were filled with music, dancers in traditional costumes, food stalls, and handicrafts. Lucy and Alexander walked among the crowd, she with the silk shawl over her shoulders, he surprisingly relaxed and attentive. He bought her grilled corn with chili and lime, pointed out architectural details that only an expert would appreciate, even took her hand when the crowd grew denser. For a few hours, Lucy managed to forget the conspiracies and family secrets, allowing herself to enjoy the moment. She observed Alexander in this new light, without the rigidity of Vance Manor, without the weight of being the Vance heir. He seemed almost normal, attractive in a way that went beyond the physical, with an intelligence that shone in every comment, a sensitivity that emerged when he thought no one was watching. I've never seen you smile like that, she commented, as they watched the fireworks light up the night sky. It's been a long time since I had reason to smile, he replied, his gaze fixed on the explosions of light. Being here with you, away from everything, it feels like a different life. One we could have had under different circumstances. What circumstances? That's where we would have met normally, where I would have asked you out, nervous as a teenager, where you would have hesitated but finally accepted, where every kiss, every touch, every moment together would have been a choice, not an obligation. The raw honesty of his words moved her. We could still have that. Alexander shook his head, an old sadness shadowing his face. There's too much history between us, too many ghosts. Ghosts only have power if we allow them to torment us. On an impulse, Lucy leaned in and kissed his cheek, a simple gesture yet laden with meaning. Alexander closed his eyes as if savoring the moment, memorizing the sensation. The drive back to the Vance estate passed in a knowing silence, their hands occasionally brushing, a new intimacy blossoming between them. Upon arriving, instead of separating to their respective rooms, they went together to the terrace, where Mr. Sterling had left a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Under the starry sky, they shared childhood stories, discovering unexpected coincidences. Both had grown up feeling different, isolated, seeking refuge in books and imaginary worlds. Both had longed for a freedom that always seemed out of reach. My father used to lock me in the closet when I misbehaved, Lucy confessed after her second glass of wine. A dark room, a doorknob turning and clicking shut. That sound still haunts my nightmares. Alexander looked at her intensely, as if understanding something fundamental about her. That's why, isn't it? That's why you've never been with a man. It's not just virtue or inexperience. It's fear. Fear of being trapped, of losing control. The perceptiveness of his observations surprised her. No one had connected those dots before, not even herself. Yes, she admitted in a whisper, the idea of being so vulnerable with someone, it paralyzes me. Alexander extended his hand, barely brushing her cheek with his fingertips. You don't have to be vulnerable alone. We can be vulnerable together. The moment became charged with electricity. Lucy felt her heart pounding wildly, the wine slightly clouding her judgment, the warmth of Alexander's hand on her face, awakening sensations she had kept dormant for years. Alexander, her voice was barely audible. I want it to be real, not out of obligation, not by contract. Just for us. He nodded, understanding the depth of what she was offering him. Just for us, he repeated, leaning towards her. Their lips met in a tentative, exploratory kiss, so different from that first furious kiss at Vance Manor. This was a kiss of discovery, of permission, of open possibilities. When they separated, Lucy saw something new in Alexander's eyes, not possessive desire, but reverence, as if he was contemplating something precious and fragile. "Not here," he said, standing up and offering her his hand. "You deserve more than a terrace and the effect of wine. You deserve a conscious choice." He led her to his room but stopped at the door. "Tomorrow, when we are back at Vance Manor with clear minds and all cards on the table, then we will decide. If you still want to, if you are sure, I will be waiting for you." He gave her one last kiss, soft as a butterfly's wing, and walked away to his own room, leaving her surprised by this unexpected act of consideration. That night, as the moon illuminated the vineyards of St. Michael's Landing, Lucy understood that what she felt for Alexander Vance had evolved. It was no longer simple physical attraction, nor resignation to an imposed contract. It was something more complex, more honest, a recognition that, under the most improbable circumstances, they had found something genuine in each other. But she also knew that the idyll of St. Michael's Landing was fragile, that upon returning to Silverton, uncomfortable truths, necessary confrontations, and perhaps dangers they were only beginning to glimpse awaited them. Before sleeping, she made a decision. She would confront Ernest, discover the truth about Michael, and protect her mother at all costs. And she would do it with Alexander by her side, not as her owner or her savior, but as her companion in this battle for truth. What she could not imagine was that this battle would begin much sooner than expected, and that the first victim could be the newly bloomed trust between her and the man who had gone from being her jailer to her most unexpected ally. The return to Silverton passed in a knowing silence, occasionally interrupted by comments about the landscape or memories of the previous night in St. Michael's Landing. Between Lucy and Alexander floated a new intimacy, fragile as glass but equally brilliant, born of shared confidences and recognized truths. However, as they approached the city, the tension began to grow. Reality awaited them with its complications. Dorothy in the hospital, Ernest and his secrets, Michael Rose and his hidden identity. "We'll go to the hospital first," Alexander decided as they entered Silverton. "I won't rest until I confirm your mother is well." The genuine concern in his voice moved Lucy. It was increasingly difficult to reconcile this attentive and protective Alexander with the image of the calculating businessman who had bought her weeks ago. Upon arriving at the hospital, they found Dorothy's room empty, the sheets disheveled, signs of a hurried departure. "Where is my mother?" Lucy asked the nurse who passed by. "Mrs. Martin was discharged this morning. Mr. Rose came with the papers signed by Dr. Miller." Lucy exchanged an alarmed glance with Alexander. "They let him take her without consulting me? I'm her daughter." Mr. Rose presented a notarized power of attorney, where Mrs. Martin designates him as responsible for her medical decisions. The nurse explained, uncomfortable with the evident confusion. Everything seemed in order. "Did he say where he was taking her?" Alexander intervened, maintaining a calm tone that contrasted with Lucy's growing anxiety. "He only mentioned he would take her to a place where she would be better cared for." They left the hospital at an accelerated pace, Alexander immediately calling his security team from the car. "I want surveillance on the Martin house, Ernest Rose's office, and Michael Rose's residence," he ordered. "Absolute discretion. If they locate Mrs. Dorothy, do not intervene, just report her location." Lucy, meanwhile, tried to contact Ernest. His phone rang, but no one answered. "Do you think he took her to our house?" she asked, referring to the family home on Kissing Lane. "It's the first place we'll check," Alexander replied, speeding through the narrow streets. The house was closed and dark. Through the windows they could see that no one had been there for days. Mail piled up under the door, plants languished from lack of water. Now what? Lucy felt panic beginning to seize her. Where else could he have taken her? Think, Lucy. Is there any special place for Ernest and your mother? A property, a country house somewhere they frequented? Lucy closed her eyes, concentrating. Images from her childhood paraded through her mind. Sunday visits, family outings, overheard conversations. "Mine as wells," she said suddenly, opening her eyes. Ernest has a house in Miners' Wells, an old mining town a couple of hours from here. We used to go in the summer when I was a child. Alexander nodded, already starting the car. I'll call Salvatore to follow us with reinforcements, just in case. Reinforcements? What do you think is going to happen? I don't know, and that's what worries me. If Ernest took your mother in such a hurry, just as we were returning from St. Michael's Landing, it's because he fears we'll discover something. And a man who's afraid is capable of anything. The drive to Miners' Wells was tense. Every passing minute increased the sense of urgency. Lucy repeatedly called Ernest, leaving increasingly direct messages. I know about Michael. I know he's my mother's son. We need to talk. Do you think it's wise to be so direct? Alexander asked. I want him to know we're coming for him. That we won't hide. Alexander looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. You're braver than you think. Miners' Wells, once a prosperous mining center, was now a semi-ghost town beginning to revive thanks to tourism. Abandoned quarry stone houses alternated with boutique hotels and art galleries, creating a landscape of contrasts between ruin and renovation. Ernest's property was on the outskirts, an old restored manor with views of the abandoned mines. As they approached, they saw two vehicles parked, Ernest's Audi and a luxury SUV they didn't recognize. Wait, Alexander said, stopping the car at a distance. We don't know who else is there. It could be dangerous. It's my mother, Alexander. I can't just sit here. I know. But we're going to do this intelligently. He took a small pistol from the glove compartment, checked that it was loaded, and tucked it into his waistband. Just as a precaution. The gesture alarmed Lucy. Did he really believe things could go that far? They approached the property via a side path, avoiding the main road. The manor seemed quiet, with some lights on inside. Through a window they could see the main living room. Ernest was talking heatedly with a man whose back was to the window. Is that Michael? Lucy whispered. Alexander nodded, his face tense. And it seems they don't agree on something. They continued around the house until they found a back door leading to the kitchen. It was ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Stay behind me, Alexander instructed as they entered stealthily. The kitchen was empty, but showed signs of recent use. Unwashed dishes, a pot with leftover broth, half-finished coffee cups. They advanced down a hallway guided by the sound of voices rising in argument. Too risky now, Ernest was saying. Alexander already knows too much. If Dorothy disappears, all suspicion will fall on him. Precisely why it's the perfect time, a younger voice replied, presumably Michael. Everyone will believe the husband silenced her to keep the inheritance. It's the opportunity we've been waiting for years. Lucy's blood ran cold. Were they planning to make her mother disappear? To blame Alexander? I can't allow it, Ernest continued. Dorothy trusts me. She always has, and you've maintained that trust for 40 years for this moment. Don't chicken out now when we're so close. It's not cowardice. It's that I'm no longer sure this is the right path. Perhaps we should simply tell Lucy the truth, show her the evidence against the Vances. And what would we achieve? Nothing. Old Augustus is dead, Edward is dead. Only Alexander remains, and he doesn't even know what really happened. What if he does know? What if that's why he married Lucy? To protect her? A bitter laugh answered. Protect her? The Vances don't protect, they use. Like they used my mother. Like they stole my identity. No, Uncle Ernest. This ends now as we planned. Alexander and Lucy exchanged glances. The situation was even more complicated than they had imagined. We have to find my mother, Lucy whispered. She must be somewhere in the house. Nodding, Alexander pointed towards a staircase leading to the second floor. They began to ascend, trying not to make a sound, but a floorboard creaked under Alexander's weight. The voices in the living room abruptly stopped. Is anyone there? Ernest called out. With no other option, Alexander took Lucy's hand and moved decisively towards the living room. Good afternoon, Rose, he greeted with cold courtesy. What a coincidence to find you here. Ernest paled at the sight of them, while the man beside him, indeed Michael Rose, even more like Alexander in person than the photographs had shown, visibly tensed. Lucy, Ernest tried to regain his composure. I didn't expect to see you here. Evidently, she replied, her voice laden with contained anger. Where is my mother? She's resting. The hospital was too stressful for her. I decided to bring her to a quieter place, without consulting me, without even telling me. Ernest had the decency to look ashamed. I tried to contact you, but you were busy in St. Michael's Landing. The implication was not lost on her. He knew exactly where they had been. You were watching us, Alexander accused. Protecting Lucy, Ernest corrected. As I always have. Protecting her, Alexander took a step forward. How did you protect her mother all these years? By hiding the truth about her son? Michael stepped between them. Watch your accusations, Vance. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know enough, Michael rose, or should I say, Michael Vance Martin? A tense silence fell over the room. It was Lucy who finally broke it. I want to see my mother now. Ernest hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. She's upstairs. First room on the right. But she's sedated. She needs rest. Sedated? Why? The trip was exhausting for her, Michael intervened, his voice softening as he addressed Lucy. The doctor recommended a mild sedative so she could sleep peacefully. Something in his tone, in the way he looked at her, a mixture of curiosity and something close to affection, disturbed Lucy. It was like standing before a distorted mirror of Alexander, the same features but with a different quality, something harder, more calculated. I'll go with you, Alexander said, but Michael blocked his way. You stay here. Vance, we have things to discuss man to man. Alexander looked at Lucy, silently asking if she would be all right. She nodded, appreciating his concern but determined to see her mother alone. The room where Dorothy rested was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the mountains. Her mother slept deeply, her breathing regular, her face more relaxed than it had been in the hospital. Lucy approached, taking her hand in hers. Mom, she whispered, what have they done to us? To her surprise, Dorothy squeezed her hand lightly, her eyes opening with effort. Lucy, she murmured, her voice thick with sedatives. I knew you would come. I'll get you out of here, Mom. I'll take you somewhere safe. Dorothy weakly shook her head. No, daughter. I need to talk to Michael. I need to see him. One more time. You knew? You knew Michael was your son. A tear rolled down Dorothy's cheek. I always knew. Ernest told me years ago when Michael turned 18. But we agreed to keep it a secret, to protect him from the Vances. Why, Mom? Why didn't you tell me? To protect you two. Secrets are like poison, daughter. They corrode the soul. I wanted you to have a normal life, free from the hatred and resentment that consumed mine for so long. Lucy tried to process this new revelation. But then, why did you orchestrate my marriage to Alexander? If you hated the Vances so much, because it was time to close the circle, to face the past. And because, Dorothy took a difficult breath, because Alexander is not like his father. He's not like his grandfather. He was a victim too. Victim? He's a Vance, Mom, the heir to everything they did to you. And he's also Edward's son, the man I loved. The man who tried to get our son back, who defied his father for us. Dorothy squeezed Lucy's hand with surprising strength. There's something you don't know, daughter. Something that changes everything. What is it, Mom? The treatment for my illness 5 years ago. The one that saved my life when doctors had given up on me. It wasn't an anonymous donor who paid for it, as I told you. It was Alexander. The revelation struck like lightning. Alexander, but he didn't know us then. He didn't know us personally. But when his father died, he found letters, photographs among his belongings. The complete story. And he decided to do what his father couldn't. Help us. Why didn't he tell me? Because I asked him not to. Because I wanted you to decide for yourself if you could love him without feeling indebted. Lucy's world spun. The man she had considered her buyer, her jailer, had also been her savior. The man she was beginning to love had been silently caring for her for years. A crash from the floor below startled her. Raised voices, the sound of something breaking. A scream. Stay here, she told her mother. Running towards the door, she rushed down the stairs, finding a chaotic scene. Alexander and Michael facing each other in the center of the living room. Ernest trying to separate them. Stop it, she cried, stepping between them. What's going on? Ask your husband about the Castellani Foundation, Michael spat, a trickle of blood running from his split lip. Ask him why he really created it. Lucy looked at Alexander, whose expression was a mixture of fury and shame. The Castellani Foundation, she repeated slowly. The one that paid for my mother's treatment. And many other treatments, Michael added bitterly, for many other women. All of them with one thing in common. They had children who then mysteriously disappeared. Is that true? Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on Michael. When he finally spoke, each word seemed to cause him physical pain. The foundation was my way of compensating for the damage my grandfather caused, not only to your mother, but to many other women whose children were stolen for corporate adoptions. Corporate adoptions? A scheme my grandfather perfected over decades, Alexander explained. He identified young women from good families, but with financial problems. He seduced them, abandoned them, and then, when they had children, he took them away to give them to high society couples who couldn't conceive. In return, these couples signed exclusivity contracts with Vance businesses. The monstrosity of the scheme left Lucy speechless. She looked at Michael, who nodded, grimly. I was one of those children, he said. Ernest didn't steal me, he saved me. When he found out what old Augustus was planning, he acted first. He took me from the hospital before Vance's men arrived and raised me as his nephew. All this time, Lucy murmured, the pieces painfully fitting together. All this time you've been my brother, half-brother, Michael corrected, and the true heir to the Vances according to Augustus's will, the other son who would inherit the Vance estate if Alexander didn't meet certain conditions. That's why you married me, Lucy said, turning to Alexander, to secure your inheritance. No, Alexander's denial was firm. I married you because it was the only way to protect you. When I discovered that Michael knew about the will, that he planned to use your mother to get to you, I knew I had to intervene. Protect me from what? From becoming another pawn in this sick game of revenge and ambition. Alexander took a step towards her, his eyes pleading. Your mother isn't the only one in danger, Lucy. You are too. Michael doesn't just want recognition or the inheritance. He wants to destroy everything that bears the Vance name, including me. And he was willing to use you to achieve that. Michael let out a humorless laugh. What a convenient narrative, Alexander. The villain turned hero. But you forgot to mention a small detail. You knew about the corporate adoptions. You knew and did nothing to stop it until your father died. I was a child, Alexander defended himself. When I finally understood what was happening, my grandfather was already dead. All I could do was create the foundation, search for the affected families, try to repair the damage. And that absolves you? That makes you the savior, the perfect husband? Michael turned to Lucy. You don't see it, do you? He's still manipulating you, as he's manipulated everything from the beginning. Lucy felt her head would explode. Too many revelations, too many intertwined betrayals and redemptions. Who should she believe? The newly discovered brother, filled with justified but potentially dangerous resentment? The imposed husband, who had gone from being her jailer to her protector? Enough, she finally said, her voice broken. Both of you, enough. She turned and left the room, needing space, a moment to think. On the manor's porch, under the sky that was beginning to turn orange with the sunset, Lucy made the most difficult decision of her life. She had to get away. From Alexander, from Michael, from Ernest, even from her mother. She needed to find herself outside that web of lies and manipulations. That same night, when everyone was asleep, she left a letter in the room she shared with Alexander at Vance Manor. I don't know if what I feel for you is love or illusion. I don't know if you are my savior or my jailer. I only know that I need to find myself away from your shadow. When I truly know who I am, when I can make decisions without the weight of family history, then I will return, if you still want me. And so, with a divided heart but unwavering determination, Lucy Martin disappeared into the night, leaving behind a marriage she never chose and a future she would have to build for herself. 6 months can seem like an eternity or a sigh, depending on how they are lived. For Lucy, the 6 months that followed her escape from Vance Manor were a rebirth. With the money she had saved for years working as a literature teacher, she rented a small apartment in Oakwood, hundreds of miles from Silverton and the memories that tormented her. Oakwood, with its vibrant cultural scene, colorful markets and bohemian atmosphere, provided the refuge she needed. She found work at an independent bookstore, frequented by locals and tourists, where she organized reading workshops and small literary events. For the first time in her life, Lucy experienced the freedom of making her own decisions, of building an identity separate from her family and her past. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when the city slept and only the distant murmur of a bar with music remained, she thought of Alexander. She wondered if he had read her letter, if he had looked for her, if he would understand the reasons for her departure. She wondered if the fire that had begun to burn between them in St. Michael's Landing had extinguished, or if, like embers under ashes, it was just waiting for a breath of life to reignite. She also thought of Michael, the brother she never knew she had, and the rage she saw in his eyes. A rage justified by decades of lies and losses, but one that threatened to consume him. Had he found peace, or was he still bent on his revenge against the Vances and her mother? Dorothy was who occupied her thoughts most. She had written to her regularly, letters carefully sent through a trusted friend so her whereabouts would not be discovered. In those letters, Lucy poured out her heart, her doubts, her self-discoveries. Dorothy responded with equal sincerity, finally freed from the weight of secrets. "Michael visits us often," Dorothy wrote in a recent letter. "At first our encounters were tense, full of painful questions and recriminations. But little by little, we are building the bond that was stolen from us. He is a good man, Lucy. Beneath all that anger there is a wounded soul that only seeks belonging." About Alexander, her mother was more reserved. "He comes to see me every week. He never asks directly about you, but I see the question in his eyes. He has changed, daughter. The armor he wore is cracking." One October afternoon, as Lucy was organizing books in the poetry section, the chime of the bookstore door announced a customer's entry. Without looking up, she offered the usual greeting. "Welcome to Free Verse Books. Can I help you find something?" "So," replied a voice she knew too well. "I've been looking for you for 6 months." Alexander stood there among shelves laden with others' words, searching for his own. He was dressed casually, jeans and a linen shirt like that time in St. Michael's Landing. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, but his eyes shone with the same intensity she remembered. "How did you find me?" Lucy asked, her heart pounding. "It wasn't easy. I respected your desire for space, but I needed to make sure you were all right." He took a step towards her, still maintaining a cautious distance. "I haven't come to take you back, Lucy. I just wanted to see you. Talk to you if you'll allow me." They closed the bookstore early that day. They walked in silence to a small cafe in the town square, where tables under the arcades offered the intimacy needed for a conversation they both knew would be decisive. "You look well," he said, studying her face like someone contemplating a long-missed landscape. "Oakwood suits you." "I feel well," she confirmed. "For the first time in my life, I am mistress of my own decisions. I'm glad for you. It's what you always deserved. How is my mother?" "Better every day. The treatment is working. Ernest takes care of her as if she were made of glass." Alexander paused, hesitating before continuing. "And Michael. Michael is also part of her life now. They've made up for a lot of lost time. And you? How are you, Alexander?" The question seemed to take him by surprise. He ran a hand through his hair, a vulnerable gesture she had never seen him make. "I've been rebuilding my life, dismantling my grandfather's toxic legacy, transforming Vance businesses into something I can be proud of. And Vance Manor, it's still there waiting. As its name implies," he offered a melancholic smile, "but I no longer live there. Too many ghosts. I moved to an apartment in downtown Silverton. More modest, more mine." Lucy nodded, recognizing the effort this change represented for someone like Alexander. "And the Vance estate? Have you lost it to the other son?" "Toast, not exactly. Michael and I reached an agreement. The Vance estate will be converted into a cultural center, jointly managed by the Castellani Foundation and a new organization Michael has created to locate other child victims of the corporate adoptions." "You and Michael collaborating?" Lucy couldn't hide her astonishment. "Last time I saw you two, you were about to kill each other." Alexander let out a brief laugh. "There's still tension, probably always will be, but we've found a common purpose, undoing the harm caused by our family." "Our family," Lucy repeated. "It's strange to think that in a way we are all connected by blood or by choice." "Speaking of choice," Alexander took an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This is for you." Inside were some legal papers. Lucy examined them, confused at first, then surprised. Annulment papers. Signed by me, Alexander confirmed. They just await your signature to be official. As you said in your letter, you need to find yourself to make decisions without the weight of our shared history. He took a breath, as if gathering courage. Our marriage began as a contract, Lucy. And like any contract, it can be dissolved when the parties so wish. Lucy ran her fingers over his signature on the document, feeling the weight of what it represented. Freedom, an open door. The end of a story that had begun with manipulation and fear. Is this what you desire? She asked, looking up at him. To free me from our agreement? What I desire. Alexander leaned slightly forward, his voice an intense whisper, is for you to be happy, Lucy, with or without me. What I desire is for any decision you make to be entirely yours, without pressure or obligations. And if I decide to sign, if I officially end our marriage, then I will wish you the best and I will move forward, always carrying you here. He touched his chest over his heart. But knowing that I did the right thing for once in my life, and if I decide not to sign, if I want more time to think, hope briefly lit his eyes, quickly controlled. Then I will wait, a month, a year, 10 if necessary. Time no longer frightens me, Lucy. I have learned that some things are worth waiting for. They fell silent as the coffee cooled between them, a mute witness to a conversation that transcended words. At neighboring tables, tourists and locals laughed and chatted, oblivious to the drama unfolding a few feet away. There's something else you should know, Alexander finally said. Something I discovered after you left. From the same pocket from which he had taken the annulment papers, he now pulled out an old photograph, worn at the edges. He handed it to her without comment. The image showed a young man holding a baby, with an older woman beside him. Lucy instantly recognized the man. It was Edward Vance, Alexander's father. The older woman was unknown to her. And the baby, who is it? She asked, although something inside her already knew the answer. It's you, Lucy, barely 3 months old. In my father's arms, but how is that possible? My father was George Martin. My mother married him after losing Michael. I thought so too, but this photograph was hidden in a secret compartment at the Vance estate, along with this. He handed her a paper yellowed by the years, a birth certificate in the name of Lucy Vance Martin, born November 10th, 1995, father Edward Vance, mother Dorothy Martin. It can't be, Lucy whispered, her world reeling again. My mother would have told me. Someone would have told me. No one knew except my father and your mother. According to a letter I found with these documents, Edward secretly returned to Dorothy after Michael's disappearance. They were together briefly, and from that union you were born. But old Augustus had already threatened to disinherit him if he acknowledged another child with Dorothy. So Edward stayed in the shadows, visiting them secretly. And George, the man I believed was my father my whole life. According to the letter, George knew the truth. He loved Dorothy so much that he agreed to raise you as his own, to protect you from Augustus Vance and his schemes. Edward funded your education through anonymous funds and visited Dorothy when he could do so without raising suspicion. Lucy felt the ground open beneath her feet. So Michael isn't my half-brother. He's my full brother. And Alexander looked at her with an intensity that burned. I am your half-brother, son of the same father but different mothers. The revelation was too overwhelming. Lucy abruptly stood up, needing air, space, a moment to assimilate this new identity presented to her. I need time, she said, her voice barely a thread. I need to think. I understand. Alexander also stood up, respecting her space. I'll be at Angel's Haven Inn until tomorrow if you want to talk. After that, I'll return to Silverton. He watched her walk away among the cafe tables, her figure disappearing into the town square crowd. He didn't try to follow her. He knew that now more than ever, Lucy needed the freedom to decide for herself. What he didn't know was that, as she walked aimlessly through the cobblestone streets of Oakwood, Lucy carried with her not only the annulment papers and the proof of her true origin, but also news that would change the course of their lives forever. News she had discovered just a week earlier, and which now took on a completely new meaning in light of these revelations. She was pregnant. And the father was Alexander Vance, her half-brother. The man who had gone from being her buyer to her protector, from being her jailer to being... What What were they now to each other with this monstrous truth between them?